Hey, I'm Michael Clark, live here at LTV. Today is Monday, January the 10th, and I am here with the East Hampton Town Supervisor, Peter Van Scoyoc, for Ask the Supervisor. Hello, Peter. How was your holiday?
Oh, it was great, Michael. Good to see you. Happy
Good
New
to
Year.
Sam, Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you. And always thank you for being here with us today to field questions and listen to ideas or generally chat live on LTV's Channel 22 and the LTV YouTube page. We're here most Mondays at 5 o'clock or thereabouts. Once we get the technical glitches out of the way. To our viewers at home, this is Ask the Supervisor. If you have something that you'd like to, a question you'd like to pose to Peter, you simply dial the number on your screen and you will be put into queue to speak with Peter. And if you prefer, you can also send questions to me at michaelclark@ltveh.org. And I'll be checking my email periodically throughout the show. And I'll read those questions to Peter as they come in. So feel free to call in and ask the supervisor. So Peter, while we wait for calls or emails, recently you provided your state of the town address, and you hit on a few key points, major points, and I'd like to review a couple of them if I could. So let's start with the obvious, something that you and I have been talking about ad nauseum for the last 2 years almost now, and that's of course the pandemic. And that was one of the key issues, obviously, on your state of the town. You gave a wonderful overview of all that's happened in our town to help fight this never-ending battle. And interesting point was that since February of 2021, the town has provided the residents with over 10,000 vaccinations at town facilities, resulting in East Hampton having among the highest rates of vaccination on Long Island, and so that doesn't include CVS and all those places. I'm assuming. So it must be a little disheartening to you to see the positive cases skyrocketing as they are, with all that the town has provided and the whole community has provided. And it's not only here, it's nationwide. So, what's your thoughts on this, Peter, and where we're headed, or what do you see going on?
So, yeah, I'm disappointed that, we're still living in a time of COVID and the pandemic is raging. We have, higher rates of infection now than we have at any point during the pandemic. I guess the good news is that we do have such a high rate of vaccination that when people are getting sick, they're not seriously ill and they're not dying. And I think that's really important to keep in perspective. The hospital admissions, have been going up, but nothing like, we saw earlier, and the seriousness of the cases is definitely not as high. My thoughts on the pandemic are that, I think this is COVID's last big hurrah. And I could be wrong, but from what I've read about these types of diseases, that they go through these cycles and variations, and it's in the virus's best interest not to kill everybody because they can't replicate if they do. So we're seeing this latest variant spreads much, much easier than any previous variant, but it's also not as virulent. So people aren't getting as sick. The infection rates are astounding, actually, right now. We're looking at 33% of those being tested at the town site being positive.
Wow.
So, by comparison, those numbers were, down around the 1.5–2% range over the summer, and even as recently as the first week in October, it was like 1.75%.
Right.
And then from that point on, it's as the weather got colder and we moved back indoors, there were 4 or 5% until we get to Thanksgiving. And then from Thanksgiving, the rates doubled and then tripled and, now quadrupled just since Thanksgiving.
But you touched on the fact that uh, the hospitalizations, which is the key number, which is the reason we were getting vaccinated in the first place, right? Is to keep those numbers down. So nationwide, you have the obvious spike and the skyrocket, but the hospitalizations tend to be down. Is it following suit here in the town of East Hampton?
Well, East Hampton tends to be not quite as bad as some other parts of the country because we have such high vaccination rates. In some parts of the country, they are looking at what we experienced in New York City when the pandemic first hit, and there was no vaccination. There are a lot of people getting very, very sick and dying still from this disease. And, fortunately, locally, we're not seeing, so many of those serious cases here. But I know a lot of hospital systems are becoming overwhelmed again. But I'm hopeful and optimistic that in the next several weeks, we'll see the rate start to decline and then drop off. And then hopefully this will be, the last wave.
I hope you're right. So let's move on to another key point on your State of the Town address, Peter, if we could. And that's another obvious one, that's the airport. There's been lots of meetings and solicited and unsolicited advice and opinions from different people on many different platforms about, basically what should we do about the current state of the airport. And I thought that maybe you can give us a quick update based on what you put forward in your State of the Town address.
Well, you're right. We have had a lot of opinions voiced over the decades about the airport, and most recently through the public engagement process that we had with the workshops this past fall, September and early October. And, we've had folks calling in anytime there's anything about the airport being discussed on the agenda of a work session, or even when there isn't anything. We do public comments. There are a lot of people who think we should just close the airport. There are a lot of people who think we should leave it alone. And then there are probably the greatest number somewhere in the middle who feel that we need to, they think having an airport's a good idea, but that we really need to reduce the footprint of that airport to a point where the community will accept the amount of air traffic and volume, and we can reduce noise to an acceptable level. So that's really, I think, our goal at this point. We're going to try that first. And now the grant assurances have expired. We have a lot more leeway in establishing an airport that we have control over. And part of the process of establishing that control will require us to close the airport for a short period of time and reopen as a publicly owned private use airport, in which we can implement prior permission required restrictions and basically have a lot more leeway in setting up restrictions. And we're going to do that in a way that specifically targets operations that are most disruptive and will gain the most benefit.
So closing the airport even for a short period of time, Peter, is part of the process in order to make that happen?
Yes, that is the pathway that we are proceeding towards, and we've had a number of FAA meetings with the FAA. They've been pretty generous with their time. This is obviously an issue that they're interested in.
Sure.
And given the fact that we now have the ability to close the airport or to operate it under a different type of method of operation than has been historically conducted. And so we'll have more future board work sessions on the topic to inform the public and go through the process, having that presented by Airport Council. We're still doing some additional research and in terms of getting data together on complaints and on operations so that we can make those adjustments, those initial adjustments And I want to express that this is going to be a process that is somewhat flexible, so that we can make changes incrementally. We don't want to displace this problem to Montauk, to elsewhere in town. So we're going to be making those adjustments with that in mind and monitoring the situation. Solving a problem in one part of town only to push it to another is not really a solution at all. So we're cognizant of that.
Well, it sounds like you got a plan. It's baby steps, as always. A lot of people, they want it to happen right away, but you know, a situation like this, my own personal opinion, that's what you got to do, right? You have to look at all the sides and deal with the things as they happen. But finally, the third point that I'd like to touch base on, Peter. A press release came out today addressing a key point in your State of the Town address, and that key point is housing affordability. And it's you're calling it all hands on housing, and it's a full-on focus to create the affordable housing options, and it calls for coordinated effort of the entire town board. And I have to say, I mean, I haven't been doing this for that long a period of time, but I've not seen an effort as concerted as this or as specific as this, where it's like it says, you know, all hands on housing, all hands on deck. Everybody, you know, really moving forward. Like these are the marching orders. Let's hit on this. So
Yeah,
what,
and, traditionally, one town board member would be the liaison to, housing, community development.
right?
And, I just feel really strongly that we were really in a crisis before the pandemic.
Yep.
And we were teetering on the edge. The pandemic came along and basically, we were no longer teetering, we were free falling.
Yeah.
We had so many people come to the region as COVID refugees, if you will, and buy up properties and rent properties, and willing to spend up to secure properties. Obviously there's a finite number of properties for sale or rent at any given time, and that market got eaten up really quickly, and prices skyrocketed. And frankly, if you survive on this local economy, you couldn't compete. And with the price of rentals, with the price of purchasing a home. And that's caused, major problems for businesses who are having trouble hiring and retaining staff. Those same problems are experienced by our local school districts, by the town municipality itself.
Yeah.
And, it really is, I think, one of the most pressing issues, and one of the things I'm most concerned about right now. I mean, obviously, the airport's on a lot of people's minds. COVID, obviously, on everybody's mind. But I think this issue has, the greatest potential negative impacts, I think, really going forward for the next several years. We don't want to see the fabric of our community unraveled. We have volunteer fire and EMS services here, ambulance services. If people can't afford to live here who volunteer for those types of positions, that's the backbone of our community. The organizations, the institutions, they all start faltering. And so it's really important that we retain a very broad and diverse community. I think, everybody has something to offer. Live here, work here. We see the commutes from outside of the area, from more affordable locations, becoming longer and longer.
Yeah.
And that's also a factor that's we've run up against, and that's one way of solving maybe the workforce issue. If we had better rail service, for instance, and there have been some some efforts and some successes with the South Fork Commuter Connection, but I just think there's no substitute for having your police, your teachers, and people who support local businesses living local.
Well, I'm not sure that any place on Long Island has the extreme challenge of this that we do, or that you do, or we all do, right? You have the high cost of living here, the highest, right? One of the highest on Long Island, and then you got the highest poverty level on Long Island. Isn't that true?
That is, well, not, I don't know about Long Island, but we're the number one town poverty rate wise in Suffolk County,
Suffolk County, okay.
Which some people just have a hard time believing, because we're also probably one of the wealthiest communities on all of Long Island. And,
so you have those two extremes, and somewhere in the middle you have to find a common place. And I really love the way that you've kind of structured this this whole all hands on housing thing, where it's segmented out and everybody's got very specific things to do, things that are measurable and things that that they're accountable for, frankly. And it's you're using the power of the team to make it happen, and I think that's the only way to address something like that.
Well, let me just say, you mentioned the team, and I'm really excited about the team, because we have, 4 other board members who are really active and involved and engaged, and we have the newly elected Kate Rogers, who I think is going to bring a lot of energy and focus to the issues that we're dealing with. And as I was beginning to say, in the past, we would have one town board member liaise to a department or whatever. And in this case, I just feel that it's necessary for us to divide and conquer. We need to have all 5 board members working on some aspect to address this problem in order to, bring about some positive movement as soon as we possibly can. So, Councilman Lease will be working on helping to develop the 395 Panago Place property. It's 12 acres there, where we're looking to have single family homes built, affordable homes for home ownership. Kathy Burke Gonzalez will be working on the Route 114 property in Wainscott. It's about 8.5 acres. It also joins the Sag Harbor Community Trust property. And I had a meeting with some of those principals in that organization today, talking about ways to collaborate and move together for a project there. And we have Sylvia Overby, who's liaison to community housing, to the CHOF, the Community Housing Fund. And we'll be looking at ways to coordinate that with the portion that I'm working on, which is development of the Community Housing Fund legislation. There'll be a referendum in November. This is for a 0.5% transfer tax, similar to the CPF fund, which has been so beneficial to preserving land. This would be a funding source that's non-property tax funding source for town projects. And it has to be passed by the voters. And again, that referendum will be in November, but ahead of that, we need to design the plan, how those funds can be spent, what they can be spent on in the process for that. And we'll be looking at long-range goals, and Kate Rogers will also be focusing on acquisition, searching for properties that can be acquired for the purposes of affordable housing.
And by the way, folks, and Peter, keep me honest on this, but I think we have, the town of East Hampton, we're way up there in terms of what we've done for affordable housing along the way on Long Island as it is, right? Isn't there a number associated?
Yes, I think we probably have the highest per capita rate of affordable housing units of any town. We're at something over 600.
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah.
30-something years ago, I mean, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for it.
I know, and I think that's a really important point. I'm glad you brought that up, Michael, because some people have the misconception that this is housing for low income or Section 8.
Yeah.
That's not the case at all. We are seeing, property values and rents again so high that teachers can't afford to live here. Police officers, who are among the highest paid, people within our local economy, they're having trouble finding places here, and it affects everybody. So, I think people who are you can't have community without people who live here year round and who really are engaged in all the different activities in life and institutions and the charitable organizations, et cetera.
Well, it's a good first step, and I can't wait to, hear more about it and be updated. But unfortunately, we've run out of time here today, Peter. So thank you once again for giving us your time, and we will talk to you next week at 5 o'clock.
Great to see you, Michael. Thanks again for having me on the show, and thanks LTV for all you do for the community.
Well, thank you, and Matt Lownes will be back with you next week. So,
Great.
see you
Take care.
soon. Good night, everybody.
Be well. Stay safe, everyone.